Hello, good evening or afternoon or morning, I guess, wherever you are listening to us. Welcome to Leadership Podcast, where our disagreements inform your decisions. I'm Thea Alley. I'm one of the hosts. I'm here with Dion, Will, and Brett. And we are recording this on Sunday, November 10th. So this is our first time getting together and having a discussion since the results of the 2024 presidential election. So this is going to be a little different tonight because up until now we've really discussed broad topics in the hopes to help folks think about these topics as they approach the election and then just their political engagement in general. But this week we're going to talk about the election because it's the elephant in the room, literally, I guess, a grand old party there. And but our goal is to discuss what happened. So Trump won, the Republicans won, so Trump has been reelected to president. But in this time around, he won with 312 electoral college votes to Kamala Harris's 226. And it looks like he also won the popular vote. So we have a very different result than what took place or what transpired in 2016 when he won the electoral college but didn't win the popular vote. And then obviously in 2020 when the Democrats won, when Joe Biden won and won the popular vote. So we are seeing a different result this time around. And what we want to do is talk about what our observations are that led to this result and what we think it means for the country moving forward into this new administration. So that's the framework for our discussion this evening. And I think, again, like usual, we all kind of we're coming at it from a different perspective. So I feel like I've started it off, but I'm going to actually let Dion start because he had a lot of notes in the chat. And I know he's thought about this a lot this week. So I'll give you the opportunity to start off with your thoughts about, how we got here and the results of the election.
All right. Thanks, Thea. I just that's my style. I take a lot of notes during the week as things pop into my head. And in honor of, or I guess maybe in sorrow of, because don't forget, our Libertarian candidate lost as well. And I know that came as a big shock to everybody. Everybody was like, oh my God, how did he do so poorly, right? And I'm sure most of our listeners and viewers could not even name who the Libertarian candidate was. By the way, his name was Chase Oliver, but came nowhere close. So anyways, I have my small batch Japanese whiskey with me tonight for this podcast. Trump won the popular vote, and he picked up, I think the Republicans picked up 4 seats in the Senate and at least 1 seat in the House. So it looks like for the first time in a very, very, very long time, the conservatives in some way, shape, or form essentially have taken hold of the executive, the legislative, and the judicial branches of government. Some people, particularly the Republicans, would probably say that's a good thing. I think most of us, even moderate Republicans, would say, maybe that's not so good, even for conservatives. So we'll see. And that will be something that we'll talk about later on, what's going to happen in the next 4 years. But I think probably the number one thing that hurt the Harris campaign was the fact that she had 107 days to do this campaign, right? The situation that unfolded in the Democrat Party just kind of left her with a crap sandwich, right? She did not really start at the starting line when everybody else started. And so I think everybody knew at that point in the campaign that it would take a Herculean effort to win. And when you look at the way that she was polling the week before the election, you do have to at least admire that she and her campaign managers were able to get her. Now, I think I have to remind people, back in June, before she was announced as the candidate, her popularity was not high at all. As vice president, she had something like 13% of people saw her as very favorable, and another 22% saw her as somewhat favorable. So she just was not very popular. And the fact that it was neck and neck at approximately 50-50 the week leading up to the election does say a lot for what she and her campaign were able to do. It just apparently wasn't enough. So,
all right, Dion. So I'm going to push back a little bit. So I worked on the Harris campaign, right? And only having 100 days to run the campaign, it surely did not help her. But I would push back, people knew who she was. I don't think there were a lot of people that were like, if I just had one more week of seeing Kamala out there, that might change my vote. I was particularly surprised that Trump made gains in every single demographic that we've got, basically. And
I actually have that chart up.
That's for
There's
Black
only two
women.
demographics.
Okay.
There's only two demographics that he did not make gains in and actually lost in. That was over 65 people and white college women.
Yeah,
but yes, every other demographic he made gains in.
So, and it was, as someone who worked on her campaign, and I'm happy to, take some of the blame on the Democratic Party certainly has our issues. And, some of the things that I think perhaps were bigger issues than the 100-day campaign thing were, things like treating demographic groups as monolithic blocks that all think the same, that all vote the same, whether you're taking them for granted or not taking them for granted, but assuming that they all think X, and the things that I think of here are the fact that Southern Baptists and Hispanic Catholics don't like abortion, regardless of what minority group they happen to be a part of, or the fact that Hispanics, first, second generation Hispanics who came into the country and are legally able to vote could be resentful of illegal immigration. So to me, those things were more detrimental to the Harris campaign than the fact that she only had 100 days. In some ways, I think 100 days might have been good for the Harris campaign because she didn't have to go through a bruising primary. There's some indications that the more people heard from her, the less that they liked her. So maybe the less campaign was better. But that's my thought.
You brought up the primary thing, and I'd like to ask the two of you, the two Democrats in the room, how do you feel about the fact that she didn't go through a primary and was kind of anointed? So in some ways it makes sense because she is the sitting vice president. So if you're not going to run the president, then you've already kind of decided the vice president is there to take his place. But on the other hand, even when you're the sitting president, you still kind of go through a primary, even though usually it's just a dog and pony show. So what do you think about the fact that she wasn't primaried?
I was always of the camp, and I think I've alluded to this in the past, that the Democrats have not done a good job of creating a bench and then allowing their bench to play. And so I was not in favor of Joe Biden running for re-election to begin with. And I wanted a primary a year ago because when Joe Biden announced that he was running in 2020, or that when he ran and won in 2020, I thought, oh, great, this is a transition presidency, right? You have someone who's a known quantity. He can transition to the next generation. When he brought on Harris and she was so much younger, I thought that was an indication that the Democratic Party, was starting to transition. When Pelosi stepped down as a leader in the House on the Democratic side, these were all positive signs that I thought our leadership was starting to see that it was time to to turn the page and go to a different generation of leaders in the Democratic Party and to speak to people and where they are. When you have the rise of the progressive left, I do think it was a double-edged sword, kind of coming back to what Will said, that you now had to talk to Black people about more than just criminal justice, right? Like I have never been arrested. Nobody in my family is in jail. I'm not in fear of going to jail. I recognize the problems that face, that involve policing and race, but it's not the thing that I vote on it, nor has it ever been, nor will it ever be, to be honest, unless an extreme candidate were to come along and, threaten to enslave Black people again, or whatever those text messages that went around the country after this election. But long story short, I wanted a primary. I think us not going through that process was not helpful from the perception, because my take on what happened was you had a party that said, we're fine, everything's okay, we're good. And people are like, no, we're not good. How much? Eggs are like $6 a carton. We're not good. And they're like, but no, we're doing better. You're fine. It's like talking to a toddler. And by the time, it's like, oh, we're not fine. There wasn't enough time to kind of figure out or get a good strategy as to how to communicate either what we're doing about the ways in which we're not fine as a country, and to connect with the people who may or may not be benefiting from the efforts that have already been made, right? And so there was a huge disconnect there, and I don't think it helped not having a primary, because having a primary on the left would have forced those discussions to happen in public much, much sooner. And so it's not even about Kamala Harris. I don't think that she was anointed. There was nothing stopping any other big, high level, big name Democrat when Biden finally decided that he was going to pull out of the race. There was nothing stopping them from throwing their hat in, other than, that Biden had endorsed Kamala.
But how would that have worked? It was not apparent to me, looking from the outside, that without a primary that they could reasonably pick anybody else.
It just would have been a contested convention.
Would have been a contested, yeah.
The fact that Biden pulled out before the convention opened up the opportunity for anybody to throw their hat in the ring. The way that it went down, where, to use your words, that Kamala was anointed, essentially everyone just endorsed her and the convention went relatively smoothly. But we've had contested conventions in the past. So it's not ideal the way that it all went down, but it certainly wasn't, it wasn't shady, or, it just what there's a mechanism for these things to happen, and it followed that.
Yeah. I think the primary issue, though, isn't about whether Kamala Harris should have had a challenger on the Democratic side. It should have been Biden, right? Whether Biden really should have gone unchecked or unchallenged within the party. I forget the gentleman who attempted to primary Biden, and he was kind of laughed out of the room. I think that Democratic politics does do the whole wait your turn much more than they do on the Republican side. We asked former President Jeb Bush, how waiting your turn and being anointed worked out for him, right? I think the Republicans have been much more open to embrace new, or maybe there was a hostile takeover that I can't completely speak to, but either way, the Republican Party has no longer just says, it's your turn now, here's your nomination. And I do think that the Democrats have done that for a long time. So I know I've been talking a lot. My last, I guess, just to answer the question, I do think that Democrats, we have things to answer for. But my problem, and the thing that kept me up at night, isn't really why Kamala lost, but why Trump won. And my issue has always been, I am a grab him by the pussy was the end of it for me. And I've never changed my mind. The idea that somebody could make that kind of comment, mean it, and it's not funny. And I myself am a woman, I'm raising a 12-year-old girl. That was just one of many things that were so disqualifying for me, is for Trump as a person. And it's not like he's gotten better over time. So I just have found his personal morale, like lack. I just don't agree with his values or the values that he projects, the things that he says, the things that he does, his inability to be accountable for, I don't know if you can call them mistakes because he doesn't admit wrongdoing, but January 6th was the second moment for me where I was just like, forget about everything that happened during the administration. When, January 6th for me was just such a dark day. So I've just never, I don't care what policies, because let's be real, I don't think that Trump himself is really passionate about governing. I think the people around him may be, but for me, I don't care what policies you think, the people around him are going to push. He was so disqualifying based on who he is as a person. So I have to reckon with the fact that most Americans that voted, those things were not disqualifying, and what that means for who we are as people and how we see who we want to project. Like, you are what you celebrate. And so if that's what we celebrate as a country, what does that mean for people like me and who see the world like I see it? I just feel like, is there a place for me in this conversation moving forward?
Brett, why do you think Trump won? Especially, this time he won the popular vote too, which means more people voted for him than voted for Kamala Harris, especially given what Thea just said about the things that should normally disqualify anybody running for office.
I mean, personality stuff aside, we've talked about this before. Like, I'm not necessarily a Trump lover, right? Some of the ways that he's handled things personally, I don't agree with. In terms of his business acumen and ability to get stuff done, that's stuff that I'm more interested in. But in terms of, I guess, thinking about like why the Trump campaign won, I think it was their appeal mostly to the middle class. There was a lot more that was put into the working class people. It was the fact that they ran, and again, I'm giving my perspective, right? Being a Republican, I probably take in more Republican-oriented news, right? Because Thea, kind of like you had, mentioned in our off channel, is like, you had no tolerance for Fox News this week.
Yeah.
It kind of goes the same way, like where there's other channels that I listen to that I try to get as much information as I can, but there's some of them that I really struggle to listen to. Because it was thrown out this week by multiple of the legacy media channels that the people voted for Trump because they were sexist and racist. And that was a rhetoric that I have heard repeatedly for a long time. And I think it just, honestly, people get tired of being called Nazis when they're just trying to feed their family, right? And so when they're looking at policies that affect the border and economics and things of that matter, that's what's more important to them. They're not necessarily interested in the social context of stuff. And so for me, at least, I think that's where a lot of the shift happened, is that you saw people that they just wanted to be able to feed their families. Thea, you pointed out eggs are $6 a carton. Like, that's hurtful, right? And especially, Dion, when you were kind of looking at the demographics that voted, one that I thought was most interesting is that Trump received the majority of votes from people who made less than $50,000 a year. Like, that's a big telltale sign, because obviously that means that the economics is more of an important thing. Other things that I think were there is, I kind of mentioned it, but the name calling is constantly there. Like, people are just, I don't know, tired of being called out for that stuff. And I think it's a problem.
So I guess, Brett, I have to ask you then. So it's hard to hear. Okay, I think when people say, well, you must be racist or you must be sexist, which I don't think is the right way to frame it. I think that what I feel is, why are you okay with somebody who seems to promote racist and sexist ideals and values in the words that they directly say? Why is that okay? The grab them by the, I keep bringing that up because it was a moment, where I feel like Trump was being Trump because he didn't think anybody was watching. And that, how is that okay? Or why does that not? I guess the thing is like, if you're if you don't have a particular viewpoint of women and how women and people should be treated, then how is that not disqualifying? I think that's where I've been stuck for 8 years when it comes to the way people talk about Trump.
I mean, at least from my standpoint, at that time of my life, I was not overly involved in politics. So I probably didn't pay attention to a lot of it at that point. I was aware of some of the comments that he'd made, but I never really dug into it much. I don't know when they were made and what context they were made. Obviously a statement like that, I'm not okay with. I don't think anybody should be okay with something like that. But I mean, just for my own knowledge, when did he say that?
It was late 2000s.
He was an adult.
It
was on Access Media or
Access Hollywood. And it was when he was doing The Apprentice. So sometime in the early 2000s. So it was, the thing is though, he didn't apologize for it. He called it locker room talk. Right. He's never apologized for it. He doesn't, it's not like there's any question that he said it. And even with January 6th, the thing isn't that, I don't think there's a debate on when he did these things. It's the lack of growth that it's one thing. I'm a very forgiving person and I think people make mistakes. And there are Republican politicians that have said and done things that I disagreed with, but I appreciated their insight when they could say, you know what, I was in, when you know better, you do better. I was in a different place in my life. I now hear other counterpoints. I see why this wasn't okay. But with Trump, it's like, F you, it doesn't matter. I do what I want. And that's where it's like, I'm stuck with like, why is that? Why are people looking at that and going, yeah, that's the person that I want to represent me in the.
So if I could weigh in on that, I think I know why, and I don't know if it helps to shed light on it, but I feel like a large swath of America has sort of grown tired of the establishment. The establishment. I need to use finger quotes there. Because it kind of all depends on how you define it, but I think a lot of people in America kind of see that the universities, the media, and politics have largely been, and Hollywood have kind of been captured by the left, and so as Brett was saying, there is a lot of subtle and not so subtle messaging that kind of goes on there, and I think especially since, half of my family is down in Texas and a lot of them are MAGA Republicans, what I hear often from them is that they like Trump because he was just a giant middle finger to the establishment. He took all the norms and all of the things that they prized that were important to them, and he crapped all over them. And it was kind of like them living vicariously through him to give the big middle finger to the establishment. Now,
so the lawyer in me would say, like, if we were in a deposition, I would object and say your answer is non-responsive to my question. My question is not why people like what he does. It's why it's okay. The bad, like, I get there's things that people are attracted to about Trump, but what I'm asking is why is it okay to turn a blind eye to all of the negative stuff? Like, is it just that those issues don't matter? They don't take it seriously. They think he's joking. That's the part, because it's like, this is a person who has shown himself to have beyond questionable moral values in the way he treats people, the way he interacts with people, the way he makes decisions. And that's the thing. So if he's just saying, well, that's fine, I don't care if he's like that, as long as he gives a middle finger to the establishment, that's where I'm like, but why are we okay with the person we choose being that way?
I will point out that Trump is an enigma wrapped in a conundrum. And I say that because he has said some pretty foul things. Like you said, grab him by the pussy. And he said many other things, right? But also, it was not very heavily reported on. But back in 2017, he appointed the first openly gay cabinet member ever to the executive branch. And now he just announced the first woman chief of staff for the White House, right? So he says these things and then he does these things. Now, is it a PR stunt? I don't know. right?
So
But
Dion,
it did happen, right?
you're making okay. So here's something. I'm Black. I'm gonna share something that Black people say about white people and sometimes you may have heard it. The defense to I'm not racist. I have a Black friend is the worst. Like I'm not racist. Thea's my friend. It's all like it's like every time you hear it, it's like oh you just made that form of an argument, and basically saying, well, yeah, Trump said these horrible things, but look, he appointed a gay person. So it's like, so I just want to that's what I hear. It's still not addressing.
So
unless you're arguing that means he doesn't mean some of the things he says but it doesn't negate appointing a gay person in your cabinet.
On this panel, I'm not the Trump person, right? So I can't make that. I'm just trying to, as like the third party, kind of looking in from the outside on both sides. I'm trying to see what other people see in it. But Will, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I mean, as the other Democrat, so let me start with saying Trump is a despicable human being. That is my opinion, and only my opinion. As someone who wants to continue to serve people in an elected role, I have always held elected officials, politicians, perhaps to a higher standard that Trump comes nowhere near meeting. The only, not defense of him, but the only reasons that I can see people continuing to vote for him despite these other things, there's really only two that I could think of. Is one, not everyone is attuned to politics the way that the four of us are. And as crazy as it seems, I think many, many people have no idea what we're talking about, the fact that Trump said certain things. They might have heard one or two of them only because we've talked about it for 8 years, grab them by the pussy, right? But for the most part, they don't care, and they're too busy working, trying to put food on their table. And for me, I have always said, you shouldn't sell your soul for a certain policy. And that's what, in my opinion, voting for Trump is selling your soul. To get a certain policy. But when the policy is something that puts food on your table, I don't think that people voting that way see it as selling your soul, especially if they haven't heard or are not aware of some of the things that he does and says. So while I despise him as a person, I'm willing to give the majority of people the benefit of the doubt that the things that they are suffering with, even if they did know all the things that he did and said, if you're struggling to put food on the table to support your family, maybe you do overlook all those other things, and for me, I recognize that it's somewhat my privilege to say that, there's no policy worth selling your soul for. If people are affected by the policy to where they can't put food on the table, they can do just about anything. And it's somewhat privileged of me to say, I don't care that eggs are $6 a dozen, which they're not, but, because I could still go buy it, but other people couldn't.
So I think part of the things that also, this is kind of getting back to where the Democrats went wrong, is I think a lot of times when you listen to people talk about the economy, you have people that are talking about the economy from like an economist perspective, and they're looking at all these different measurements and saying, well, look, technically this is where we are, but they're not looking at it from the way that most people encounter the economy on a day-to-day basis. Right. Is my rent too high? Is gas expensive? When I went to the grocery store, am I paying significantly more now than I was paying a couple of years ago? Those are the ways that people measure the economy, right? When I need a job, can I get a job? And can I get a good job that pays well? Do I have benefits? Do I feel like I'm doing okay, or am I nervous? Am I anxious? And I don't think that the Democratic Party has done a good enough job of connecting the dots of whatever their policies are to those types of, anxieties and those types of issues. I don't think we did I think we lost the messaging. And I think it's not enough to just say that Biden went on the picket line, because there's a lot of people who don't have unionized jobs. There's plenty of right to work states where that is not going to impact their wages, and so I think that the Democrats did do things that were targeted at what they viewed as, working class people, but it wasn't broad enough to impact just everyday Joe Schmo, and I think that that's something we have to answer for. I think the flip side, though, that I have is I don't believe that Trump will do better. I think that Trump is good at running for president. And I think he's been running for president since 2015. So for the last 9 years, this man has been running for president. But from what I saw when he was in office, he himself did not seem to have any interest in actually governing, nor did he seem to have an interest in surrounding himself with people who did and could, or he didn't seem to be able to get out of his own way enough. And that was when you had a stronger Republican elected bench. I don't think the benches we saw with the House this past year, when Republicans are in charge of the House, they couldn't even agree on a speaker and get anything passed. And so I don't have a lot of confidence. This isn't like, what does this mean for the next few years? I don't have a lot of confidence in this particular group of Republicans to actually govern in a way that accomplishes anything but chaos. And that's just based on what I've seen with the party. We'll see. Maybe they'll surprise me, but I don't think having unified government is going to change the chaos within that party, especially in the House. So, yeah, we'll see.
So to touch on Thea's point, Democrats are horrible at messaging. We just are. And everything that she just said is spot on. Dems will point to GDP growth and, the fact that we recovered faster than, the rest of the developed world after the pandemic, and these abstract concepts or higher level concepts that day-to-day people don't know about, don't care about, don't see, can't touch. Like, we suck at messaging. Now, granted, that was all we could point to because gas was high and eggs were expensive and whatever else. But we've got to do a better job of relating to the individual and not, speaking in an echo chamber to other elitist academics, we'll say.
I think that it's probably important for us all to recognize, and I think we can all agree, that whoever won the presidency in 2020 was likely not going to get reelected in 2024, because the president who inherited the COVID lockdowns, the pandemic, the recession that was bound to happen from that, was going to have to answer to that in 2024. Right. So I firmly believe if Trump had won in 2020, that the Republicans would be the ones facing the backlash this year because of what happened over the past 4 years. Because I don't see that anything the Republicans could have done over the past 4 years would have made much of a different path for our country than what Biden and his administration did.
I think it would have been different vibes. I do think that the Republicans would have approached the border differently than the Biden administration, or at least they would have sold it differently. Even if the policies weren't different, they would have messaged it differently. So I do think that particular problem people would have felt differently about it. And I do think realistically, it probably would have been addressed differently under whether it's a way I agree with or not. I'll give the Republicans credit in that I think their approach would have been different. But I agree with you from an economic standpoint. I don't think there was, it's the selling it, right? Like, so one of the things that I had a family friend I had my first experience with like a MAGA person being like in my family space, like at a family event. So like for years, everyone's like, oh, what do you do when you have like, more conservative and progressive people at Thanksgiving. I've never had that. Like my parents, me, my sisters, we all kind of are aligned. And so like a family friend came over last night and we were having like a party, and she walked in and was like, "Make America great again." And I thought she was being funny. Black woman, immigrant Black woman. And I thought she was being funny. And then very quickly we realized she was not. She was serious. And I was like, okay, it's fine. Well, good for you. Like it was a party. And then she kept like going in on it. And I was just like, oh, you're like, oh, this is happening. And then finally we had to do the like politics free night just so everyone could have a good time. But like coming back to the conversation, it's just like, I think that, everything she said, it was enlightening because it's similar to what Brett's saying. She was talking about being on a fixed income. She's retired. She worked for the electric company for 30 years here in LA, owns her home, but is on a fixed income and felt like that the way that price and the cost of living being so high. And in California, we have everything is pretty much democratically run. She said, why should I trust the Democrats? Look what I'm going through here. And we have at every level, it's Democratic leadership. So I can't say I can't be like, oh, you're wrong. It would be arrogant. That's her experience. So she thought that that Trump would care about the things she cared about. She did.
That's probably a good segue into what should be our next topic, which is, okay, now Trump's been elected. What now, right? What happens over the next 4 years? Brett, do you have any insight? Do you want to talk about what Trump has proposed for the economy over the next 4 years, and will it make a difference?
So, the main one that gets thrown out there is energy production, right? And that's where, Theo, you were talking about like the last 4 years under like the recovery from the COVID pandemic and stuff, where the Republicans may have made a difference, would have probably been in energy production, looking to open the oil reserves and pipelines that we have access to cut costs in that area. Whether they would have done it or not, I don't know, right? You can always, have hindsight 2020 and speculate on what people have done, but unless you're there, you never know. But I know that's one of the initiatives that the Trump administration is looking at now, is going back to an energy dominance and energy production to really kind of drive that cost down. We'll see what effect that has on the economy. It's one of those, at any time that you have central planning, there's always unintended consequences. It doesn't matter who's making the decision. There's always some trickle down effect somewhere you didn't anticipate. So we'll see how that works out. Other than that, in terms of the way forward and what they're looking to do, I think the biggest things that I see is just continuing to look for ways to help the middle class. I know there's always pushback on, corporate tax cuts and things of that nature. But when you look at giving companies the ability to not have to pay out as much taxes, that does have an effect on their employees and how that works into it.
Trickle down economics?
To some level, yeah. You kind of have that.
I just threw up in my mouth a little bit, Dion.
So,
yeah, we've heard that before. I don't know if it's right. Like, I remember when I was a kid hearing everybody, bash trickle down economics, but it does seem to me anecdotally, from my own personal experience, that when these corporations get tax cuts, that we do see at least reduced prices. But I don't know. Maybe that's just
I'm not paying attention. When you start to look at people saying tax cuts for the rich, right? It's been long purported that the Republicans are the class of the rich. But if you've noticed over the last probably 50 years, if you actually kind of watch it, there has been a political realignment. Right? The affluent and the wealthy have shifted more to the left. You look at the billionaires that we have in this country, most of them are on the left side of things, right? A lot of wealthy people have shifted that direction.
Except for Elon and Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, I would push back on that piece because, if you look at how Trump's campaign was financed, I think that speaks against the point you're making.
I'm not saying that there aren't wealthy Republicans. I'm not saying that there aren't wealthy Republicans. I'm just saying that there has been a shift where you have some of the most wealthy people in this country. They do vote to the left side of things.
especially
there's not a whole
Hollywood,
lot.
right? Hollywood and athletes, I think you get a lot of.
But Silicon Valley is where the money is, right? So Hollywood
and they're all
athletes,
mostly left leaning too.
No, not at all. Not at all. As someone who represents Silicon Valley clients, they are not left leaning. And Elon Musk is
Really?
very much,
Okay.
he's very much a product of Silicon, like that type of mindset. And no, Silicon, Peter Thiel, like they're all Silicon Valley folks. Like these are not. I think that's a misnomer that where you're talking about, and we're talking about the 1%, right? Extremely wealthy people. No, again, who funded Trump's campaign? That's who funded Trump's campaign, the crypto guys and all. None of them were voting Democrat. None of them were supporting Kamala Harris. So, and the only reason I push back on that is I don't disagree that we're like looking at who voted and where their votes went. Yes, working class people voted for Republicans, but that's not because the Democratic Party is made up of a bunch of the billionaire donor class. I think that's not an accurate statement.
No, I'm just saying that there's been a shift, Thea. Not saying that is like that they've completely taken over this. Like you're just starting to see a shift to that, to where more affluent, wealthy people are moving that direction. I think it's
not the 1% though. I think when you say affluent, wealthy people, it's maybe upper middle class people. That's the perception that because the college educated folks vote more overwhelmingly Democrat. So I think when people talk about affluent folks, they're actually talking about us, people, the four of us that would be in our economic bracket.
To most people, we probably fall into that category.
Yes.
Right? Because again, you look at the votes where the majority of people who make under $50,000 a year voted for Trump. Like that's where the thing is. And so you have this shift that has happened over time. But a lot of it, I think, comes from the political parties just kind of playing the benefit to their donor classes. Right. And it's there's just things that are just antithetical about the needs of the working people that are not represented in those donor classes. I mean, you look at the Republican Party before Trump, it was all about foreign wars and free trade, right? The Democratic Party, open border, anti-nation state, those kind of things. Well, that's a problem because most people don't care about that kind of stuff. Most people are anti-war and anti-free trade, and they don't want abortion bans and this kind of stuff. Like, so it's like if you look at the grouping that's in the middle, again, the average American, right? When you think about average, you're going to take up at least 50% of the population and catch a little bit of the fringe. And that's where we see this massive shift that kind of happened to where people are thinking that. So that's what I'm thinking in terms of like looking forward, because that's what we're trying to talk about here is, moving forward. I think that's where the Trump administration is really going to put most of their effort, is changing things for the working class, getting away from the, what did I call it?
Culture war.
Well, it wasn't so much that, but it's just like you have these, like the thinking class versus the working class, right? There's a big difference between people who work with their minds versus work with their hands. And you have a large population that works with their hands. Those are the people that really need help, because honestly, for the most of us that do work with our minds in that instance, our lives are made drastically better by the people who work with their hands. And
so sorry, go ahead, man.
No, I was just saying. So if we don't take care of that level of our people, we're going to run into problems. Now, we talked about before, my thought is not necessarily that government should step in and help them with everything, but that they should remove obstacles to allow people to advance more and have more opportunities in doing so. And so lowering taxes, making sure that we are energy dominant, that we can, drop down gas prices. Because think about it, guys, gas prices affect everything, right? That's, when you have a trucker who's paying $4.65 a gallon for diesel and has to drive across the country to bring goods, well, that's going to obviously ratchet up the price of everything else in line that goes from that. Every piece and part that attached to it goes up. And that's where we start seeing those prices. So if we can bring that down, that starts to have a huge impact on the people. So anyway, what were you going to ask, Will?
So, I can see that trade-off in terms of opening up the pipelines and drilling to bring gas prices down at the expense of largely the environment. I can see both sides of that argument. My fear, so we haven't talked about Trump's plan with tariffs. My fear is that, in order to, America first and stick it to China, and he puts a 60% tariff on these goods, the very people that he's purporting to be helping, the middle to lower class, it's the cost of their goods is what's going to go up. Meanwhile, he's going to give tax breaks to the rich. So I'm hesitant to say that, the Republicans or Trump in particular is the ones, really looking out for the little guy.
I think I don't know if I've said this before. I believe Project 2025 is real. I think that the policies that are within it are real, whether you call it, you can put whatever label on it. I do think the people that are around Trump believe in those policies, believe in some of those ideas. And I think that the harm that some of those initiatives could do are real. And that's where I am sad, both on the social policies that it seems to promote. That just makes me feel like, I don't want to have to watch 4 years of what's coming in from the social side of it. From an economic side, I think that Trump is far more likely to focus on the mass deportations and maybe being able to push these tariffs. I don't know if the business world will support him in that. So I'm counting on capitalism to push back and the tariffs not happening because of capitalism and the effect that it would have on corporate America. But the mass deportations, just the chaos that it will create, even if you don't successfully do it, just pursuing it and the fights that may be around pursuing it, to me, will be a distraction of things we could be focusing on that would be more beneficial to the same group of people that we're talking about.
But I think the mass deportation, even the attempt, would also crash the economy.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. And the chaos. I think it's chaos. I just see chaos, and we haven't even mentioned. I think we've been very generous in focusing our conversation on actual policies and not on whatever retribution Trump is going to seek at the people he perceives to be his enemies and people who did him wrong, and the amount of time and effort that may be wasted on those types of things. And so it's just like, I'm dreading watching the news and having to constantly listen to all the ways in which our government is in chaos because they're focused on the wrong things. So in theory, I'm hoping that because Brett, you seem very optimistic, and I'm hoping that maybe you're right, because I'm rooting for America, right? I'm rooting for us to do well, but I don't share your optimism. And I just don't think that Trump has shown the ability to lead in a crisis. And then the last thing I'll say, because I think it's important, I also think that more lives will be lost in Gaza and more innocent people will be killed, because I don't think our approach will change under a Trump administration for the better when it comes to how we're approaching those conflicts. In addition, the same thing with Ukraine. So I know we haven't focused on foreign policy. We haven't had a discussion about foreign policy in this group. I think all of us have spent times in far parts of the world and seen, what it's like, what war looks like firsthand. At least I know both Dion and I had deployed to Afghanistan. So I just think under Trump's leadership, it's not going to be good. I think it's going to be a worse outcome than perhaps if you had an administration that was willing to maybe take a different position on Israel and Gaza or Ukraine.
So Thea, I think you hit just about every one of the concerns that I had about a future Trump presidency. I think the only one that you didn't bring up is the pending 2 Supreme Court vacancies that he now has a Senate, and he's got a simple majority, right? So I don't remember. I think it was the Democrats, but I can't remember exactly who decided to get rid of the filibuster for judicial appointments. But that Democrats. Probably seems like a really bad idea in hindsight now, right? Because he's got 53, I think, senators because now.
Senate Republicans wouldn't let any of the judicial nominees through.
Right. So he's got a 6-3 right now, and 2 of those justices are probably going to be looking to retire within the next 4 years. So.
But they wouldn't. The thing is, the one thing I will say, even if a Democrat had won I think Clarence Thomas was going to ride that out, and he would have done an RBG on us, right? So I don't think God willing, their health hold out. I don't think that they would have retired under a Democrat. So I don't think it would have made a difference. I don't necessarily think that a President Harris would have had the opportunity to appoint any, left-leaning justices into those seats. And so I think it will be a zero-sum game. I'd be much more worried if it was Justice Sotomayor or Justice Kagan that was, where we think, they're looking to retire, they're getting up in age. But because the justices that are going to go were already pretty far to the right, I don't know. I knock on wood, I don't know how much worse we can do than a Thomas as a lawyer who's read his works. So, yeah.
So, Dion, I'll add one more to the list, and especially because all four of us served. I worry for the men and women who are still in the military, active duty, under a Trump administration, when he talks about using the military on American citizens, and just the uncertainty that he brings to foreign relations. I'm a pessimist in general, but I think that there will come a time in the next 4 years administration where the men and women in uniform are going to have to make some tough choices about following orders that are illegal, immoral, unethical. And I, would never want to put anyone in that kind of position. And I feel for them. On the other hand, I'm super glad that I got out when I did. I could speak out about it. But I think as a pessimist, I think that's going to happen one way or another.
If it gives you any small comfort, there was talks about that during his first administration. And I have a lot of friends who were active duty or, retired and were GSs in Colorado, all, MAGA type people. And everyone to a man, when the news was talking about that back in I don't know if it was 2017, 2018 or something, when he wanted to use the military against the rioters that were out in the streets. Every person said, apparently he's never heard of posse comitatus, and that's just an illegal order, so you don't have to follow it.
But
and so it gives me small clump. Was that?
He has heard of the Insurrection Act. Or someone around him has,
I think the thing that this kind of speaks to is in the first administration, especially as it involved the military, he had high-ranking retired generals in very high leadership positions in his cabinet and in the White House staff. I do not think we're going to see that, maybe outside of Michael Flynn. I don't think we're going to see that again. And so I do think we might find ourselves where we have more of a disconnect between the commander in chief and the armed forces. And I don't know who's going to be advising him in that relationship, who's going to be. So I think this is one where Secretary of Defense is going to matter a lot. And having people, because I don't know what your guys' experience have been being outside of the military, but people who have never served, they have a very different perception of the military, how it runs, what its purpose is, how it should be utilized, than those of us who have served and made that our career for whatever period of time. So I just hope there are people close to him that, can still have that check. You know what I mean? Like you said, Dion, where it's like, well, obviously he hasn't heard of this.
And you bring up a very good point, and it's broader than your concern about just the DoD. Will, it's Trump has said in a lot of interviews that one of the mistakes that he made during his first term was that he didn't know Washington, he didn't know the people, and so he surrounded himself with people who were sort of Washington insiders, but not necessarily on his team. And so conceivably that what that means, if we read between the lines, is that during his first term, he was stopped from doing a lot of the things that maybe he wanted to do because there were people here that around him that were not necessarily loyal to him, but were still, loyal to America. And does that mean in the next 4 years that he chooses people to be around him who are absolutely loyal to Donald Trump? and not necessarily loyal to America. And again, that comes back to, well, he's got a majority in the House and the Senate now. What does that mean, Brett? So can you quell the fears of the Democrats and the Libertarian in the room that he's not going to abuse power?
Please.
Well, I guess probably the first thing I'd have to say is I don't know the man, right?
Yes.
I know of him.
We all know him.
Well, but there's a difference there, right? I mean, really, in terms of like, you think you know somebody, but until you truly spend time with someone, you can't, right? I mean, trying to understand someone through simple sound bites and press conferences, you don't get to actually know someone. And like I said, so I don't know the man, right? So I can't say what he does in those environments. And Will, maybe I'm the opposite of you. Maybe I'm an optimist when I kind of look at that, because I do have hope. And it's not necessarily because of Trump that I have hope. That's where I think a lot of people misread the situation, right? I don't think a lot of Republicans look at Trump as our savior, right? That's not the point. It's just kind of going back to what Dion's point was before. It's just he is very against the current way of doing things. But I look at the people that he's started to surround himself with, and I have hope for them. It's kind of setting up that next generation of political leaders that are going to come in, and that I think people really do believe in American exceptionalism, and that we are a nation that is just different than the rest of the world, and we operate differently. Do I think he's going to have a perfect presidency? Absolutely not. Like, he's going to make mistakes, as we all do. I'd be hard pressed to find someone over the next 4 years who doesn't make some mistake in their life or treat someone poorly or have a bad day, right? It's just obviously when your life is publicized in a complete manner where everybody gets to see it and you only get sound bites put out there, there's perceptions that come from that. So I would hope that people would be able to go into this time frame and have grace for the people that are running our office, or not our office, but our country, right? That are in office running our country. And as for me as a Christian, one of the biggest things that I know to do is to pray for my leaders. I wasn't thrilled about the political path that we've been on for the past 4 years. But one thing I absolutely did is I praised our leaders, right? You look at people that are out there and just would bash Biden, calling him Sleepy Joe and all kinds of stuff. And, you got the Let's Go Brandon crowd and all that kind of stuff. Like, guys, that's not honoring. It's not. Like, whether you agree with someone or not, they are the leader of our country. And we have to be behind them in some capacity. It doesn't mean that we have to agree with everything that they do, but we do have to move towards a level of unity as Americans to keep that edge that we have in the world. And that's what I'm hopeful for, is that people are coming more together, more to the center, that the American people have found a voice of their own, that they can actually speak up and speak out against these things that they don't agree with. I honestly, I don't know. Yeah, he says some goofy stuff, right? There's no doubt about that. Trump is Trump when it comes to that. Like Dion said, he's an enigma wrapped in a conundrum. I can't figure the man out. But again, I don't spend time with him.
But one thing, Brett, though, almost unanimously, so many people who did spend time with him, so many people that were a part of that first administration came out and were like, this man is unfit to be president. And that's where it's hard for me, because you're right, I don't know him personally, but whenever the people around you are all echoing very similar feedback, at some point you have to think it's not just a bunch of disgruntled people. And we're talking his vice president. And nobody's thinking Mike Pence is a screaming, bleeding heart liberal. Like, he is not that. And that's where I get stuck on how do I give somebody grace when it seems like anyone who knows anything about them, that's had that firsthand experience, that's been in the room, says, oh my goodness, no, this is not.
So there is the, I don't want to quite call it a conspiracy theory, but there is the thought from a lot of people that, you essentially have the uniparty, right? That you have I think a lot of them would put Mike Pence into the category of the traditional establishment Republican. And by the way, this circles back a little bit to where we were at the beginning of the conversation with, I had in my notes that I don't think the Cheney endorsements helped Kamala Harris at all, because they were actually, Dick Cheney was actually called Hitler back when he started the war in Iraq, right? And a lot of people were like, oh, he's just a warmonger, and he's all about the military industrial complex. And so anyways, I would put like Mike Pence and the Cheneys and those of them sort of in the category that a lot of people would call the establishment, along with certain Democrats like Pelosi and Schumer and all those guys. So it could
What about
be.
the generals? What about the generals? Like, that's who I was kind of referring to. The generals, your chief of staff is saying you're a fascist. Your former chief of staff, that's someone who was close to you on a daily basis. So many members of that White House staff have come back out later and said the things that they witnessed were not okay with them. So it's beyond the establishment. I agree with you about the Cheneys. I think it's funny. It's almost laughable that a Democratic nominee was like, look, here's a Cheney that supports me. I remember I kind of came into politics into like my political like maturity in the George W. Bush years. And I remember the role that Dick Cheney had during that time in the wars in Iraq and everything. So it's just ironic that here it is, we're now using them as an example of, oh, well, they support us, therefore you should. I understand the strategy, but it's just, in hindsight, it's laughable.
Yeah, Thea, I mean, just to play devil's advocate a little bit, the strategy behind it was, if Liz Cheney comes out and endorses, that gives permission to mushy Republicans to also vote for Harris. And she needed, or independents to vote for Harris. She needed some level of that. I can't stand the Cheneys just as much as the next liberal. But electorally, strategically, I thought,
I understand. Yeah, I understood the strategy, but I think that was a strategy to get people maybe our age or older at best, at our education level at best, right? You're that's not going to get, a 30-year-old, blue collar person, like Brett says, a guy who works with his hands. And, like Dick, what Liz Cheney is saying was not going to connect to that type of voter. And that's where we lost,
I think the Taylor Swift endorsement was actually worse. Worse than
you think it was worse?
The Swifties. Okay, we are
no,
not.
I got to hear this. I got to hear this.
Going to say anything negative. I do not want the way that our podcast goes viral because we came for the Swifties. We are not going for the Hive. We're not going for the Swifties. We're not doing that.
Nobody that listens to Taylor Swift was like, oh, I was going to vote for Trump, but because of Taylor's endorsement, I'm going to vote for Harris. But a lot of, I believe, conservatives and Republicans were like, see, it's nothing but these spoiled rich kids. I feel like the Taylor Swift endorsement just solidified the stereotype of Democrats and may have hurt us more than the Cheney endorsement.
I could see that. Look, just in case this gets out to Taylor Swift and her fan base, I love Taylor Swift's music. We listen to it in the car. My son loves Taylor Swift, right? So
what's that song? I'm the problem, it's me. That maybe that.
But I see your point, Will. I had not really thought of it that way, but I think you're absolutely right. And more to the point, I think for a large portion of Taylor Swift's career, she probably appealed mostly to Republicans, right? Because they tend to be the country music listeners. And she started off in country music. And even when she sort of made that transition to pop, I'm sure a lot of them went along with her. And throwing her hat in the ring for the Democrat nominee may have pushed some of them away. Don't know.
And I think that's fine. I don't want to. I don't want to. One thing I don't like, or I'm very careful that I don't want us to do, is to take away one person's autonomy and their ability to have their own opinions and belief system. I don't think that Taylor Swift's endorsement was not genuine. I think that's what she believed.
Mm-hmm.
I think, because again, the cat picture, JD Vance and his some of his comments about women and especially, childless cat ladies and all that, I can see why it would be offensive. He's made comments about single mothers, and I guess my family situation is everything that's wrong with America based on some of the things that he has said, and that's personally
you have
offensive.
a dog.
So I do have I have 2 dogs now, and I have had a child, right? But I don't have a husband, so I guess.
But you don't have a cat, so you're okay.
Yeah,
I mean, let's be clear. I mean, working on the Harris campaign, we loved the endorsement, and we created, these Swifties for Harris groups. Like, we were all about it. I'm just saying, compared to Cheney, that's all.
I actually think, and this is something, because we're doing a podcast, and so let's talk. I think a fatal mistake was not going on Joe Rogan. And it's not about what she would have said on that podcast. It's the perception that she didn't engage with him and that type of audience. And that feeds into the knowledge of being disconnected or not being focused on that particular group of voters. And love Joe Rogan or not, A, he's not a hard interview. He's not. And B, it gives you the opportunity to show yourself as a person, whoever you are. And so if part of the issue is people not knowing who you really are, or she is too scripted, or she was too on message, it would have been an opportunity to negate all of that. And so I think she thought she accomplished that when she went on Fox News and did an interview, but I think she could have gotten so much further and done had achieved that goal much more by going on Joe Rogan. And so that's
I think
one.
What hurt her. Yeah. I think what hurt her more than not going on Joe Rogan was that it got out that she had initially agreed to go on Rogan, but her terms were it would only be an hour and he had to come to her.
Yeah.
Don't know if that's true or not, but that's the story that came out.
I've heard that too.
Yeah. And, Rogan's got something like 30 million subscribers or something.
Yeah.
Even Trump went down to Austin and sat there for 3 hours with him. Right. And so it's kind of that combination of, if it was just, hey, I've decided I'm not going to do Rogan, and that was it, she probably would have been okay. But it was the addition of, hey, Trump already did it. And you apparently were trying to dictate terms to this guy who's got 30 million subscribers. Like, who do you think you are, lady?
I agree. I think candidate Kamala Harris got that wrong. I think Vice President Kamala Harris got that right. Okay, so that's where the rub is. Now, she should have picked to be candidate Kamala Harris in that point, in that moment. But the idea that you're like, oh, the vice president has to come to, so the reverse also is true, from a security perspective, all these other things, the vice president has to come to me. But candidate Kamala Harris should have gone because the gains were worth it. I think the gains, especially when you're talking about the very types of people that want them to hear you, that would have been a setting where they could have heard her in a unique way that she didn't get that message out through other forms of media. And so, I know she did Call Her Daddy, the Call Her Daddy podcast, and she did Charlemagne. I thought doing Charlemagne was good. But there's or Charlemagne is the Breakfast Club in New York. But I think Joe Rogan was the one that it was a particular audience that we see. That audience is the same people who didn't feel that they were being spoken to. And so, and I can't say they were wrong, right? They're not wrong. She was, you know what I mean? If you don't go and she was really good about saying things like, I have to earn every Black man's vote. When she went on the Breakfast Club, she said, it's not owed to me. I'm not entitled to those votes. I have to show up and earn those votes. And I think there were definitely ways you can see her going to barbershops, her going, her trying to connect with that particular, voting block. So, but you kind of have to do that across the board, right? And I think not going on Rogan was an example of missing an opportunity to connect and hear that feedback, right? Whatever feedback you were going to get and feel that connection. So, what it
just looking at demographics plays a big piece into that, right? Because it's an understanding that roughly 50% of the population is male, right? but then about 60% of the population was white. And so like, just when you have that in mind, it's like understanding how to play to the demographics and what's there. It's just something to be acknowledged.
Did you not see the white dudes for Harris commercial that aired?
I did have it. Yeah. I think outside of demographics, but I think it's the meeting people where they are. You got to find people where they are, and that audience organically exists. So, before we started our episode tonight, I remember talking about, I kind of like Brett alluded to, I opt out of this week in particular. I opt out of certain right-leaning media, Fox News, the Fox Newses of the world. But I do think listening to Joe Rogan, depending on it, I don't always have the time because his podcast is super long, but it keeps me. I do enjoy that because there's inevitably a conversation that he has that is not it's not my echo chamber. And I'll be like, oh, I didn't know that was something that I didn't know that point of view, or I hadn't thought of it that way. I may not agree with it. And there's plenty of things that he has promoted, in my opinion, on his podcast that I completely disagree with, but at least I know it's out there, right? Because I'm listening. And I think that is something that we all need to do better. But I think what we saw from the Democratic Party over this whole campaign, so not just Kamala Harris, but Joe Biden, was the inability to hear what's like the conversations that are going on and connect with people where they are. And I think that's something that Trump has been good at. For better or worse, there's a certain group of people that he speaks to and they hear him and they feel heard by him in his communication style. I think there's other people he has the opposite effect on. And I think I'm one of those people that the way he communicates and things he says just completely alienates me and I can't hear past it. But there's people who have that, I think whatever we do moving forward, we need to do better to try to find someone. I don't think Trump is the answer long term. I think the Republican Party is going to struggle when it's not Trump, because he is not, you see it. So this is the last thing I think I'll bring up. What you did see, though, is that some of his surrogates and we've seen this over a number of elections, that these Trump endorsed extreme to the right MAGA candidates did not win, right? So Carrie Lake did not win. So here it is, Arizona votes for Trump, and they did not elect Carrie Lake to the Senate. The same thing in North Carolina for governor. You had North Carolina went for Trump, and they absolutely did not vote. What was his name? I only remember him from the porn site. He doesn't need to occupy space in my mind, but a Republican candidate for governor in North Carolina. So I think that is something, though. I know we've been beating up on the Democrats. We lost. We deserve it to a certain extent, but I think for the Republican Party, candidates do matter, and Trump has a lot of charisma. He had a lot high name recognition. He is, for better or worse, he is a unique person that is good at connecting with people. When it's not him, those same antics, like you said, that him being an enigma, I don't know if you get the same outcome if you continue to run people that are very loyal to him, but that lack his talent. So we'll see.
Yeah. I'm noticing the time.
Yeah. To help us wrap it up, just to touch on, not meeting the voters where they are, that's why Pete Buttigieg, you may remember him from Fox News. He's always going to those type of outlets. Yeah. That's why Pete Buttigieg in 2028 is going to be the Democratic nominee.
Ooh, are you doing that? Are we doing that?
You heard it here.
To wrap it all up and look to the future, it'll be Mayor Pete in 2028.
So here's the thing. I will say, Oh, go on, Dion.
No, go ahead. Because I will say, in 2005, I had an assignment as a baby little cadet at the Air Force Academy to predict who was going to be the Democratic nominee in 2008. And I was the only one who said Barack Obama, and I was right. So perhaps, Will, I'm passing the torch to you, because in the poli-sci department, I got some of my old professors wrote me, and they were like, hey, you called it. Because I was the only one that wrote my paper and said it's going to be Barack Obama. So yeah, maybe from your lips to God's ears, I don't know. So
we'll see.
I think to wrap this up, I think what probably sums it up is a line that we heard from the Democrat Party in 1992, or 92, 93 over and over again, which was, it's the economy, stupid. And that was the line that was put out there for why Clinton beat Bush Sr. And I think that's probably what we saw this time around. Does everybody agree that probably the number one thing that kind of was on everybody's mind that swung towards Trump was the economy?
I agree for that for 2024. I don't completely agree with for in 16, but that's another conversation for another day.
Yeah. Okay. So I think, Thea, you'll close us out. So, Brett, why don't you go ahead and start us off with what's been making you happy that wasn't Trump winning the election?
So it's kind of funny. I wouldn't even say that necessarily made me happy anyway. Different emotion. But as far as what made me happy, I honestly didn't put a whole lot of thought into that this week. I spent a lot more time doing research and looking stuff up than I did about that. I think something that makes me happy is we just recently got information from a few of our friends that one of them is expecting a baby, which is really cool because they've been trying for years without success. And they finally were able to get pregnant. And so that's always exciting. And then another one of our friends, the same thing, had been trying for several years and they had decided to throw their hat into the ring for adoption. And they just got approved for that. And so they're going to be welcoming home a little girl here next month. So that's always exciting.
Wow. That's awesome. How about you, Will?
So part of why I got out of the military when I did was I've always loved politics, been interested in politics. I've got several degrees in political science. I taught political science at the Air Force Academy. And I've always kind of known that my next career, my second service, was going to be as an elected official. And the results on Tuesday, while I did not like any part of them, it signified this kind of transition for me that now that the 2024 election is over, 2026 was kind of when I was looking to run. And, now I can look ahead, move forward. And it's just an exciting part of transition time in my life. And I'm excited to see what the future brings. And I'm excited.
Sounds like with the 2024 election over, you've turned a page.
Okay, we got to kill that. We got to kill that. We can't keep turning the page. It was a losing slogan.
Maybe in 26 you will be unburdened by what has been. I'm sorry. Yeah. I'm done. I'm sorry. I'm done. All right. So for me this week, I had to take a trip for work to Colorado Springs, which I spent a lot of time in because the Air Force, they are amazing, the Personnel Center, and I do love them. They did great work for me. It's hard to complain. But right after I finished a master's degree at AFIT, which is the Air Force Institute of Technology, in aeronautical engineering, with an emphasis on aerodynamics and air-breathing propulsion, they sent me to Air Force Space Command. And then, I met my ex-wife there and, got married, and then I married into Air Force Space Command and spent a lot of time in Colorado Springs. So I do enjoy going back there, even though I kind of wish they would send me like my other coworkers to like Hawaii or Australia or, something like that. But anyways, the thing that made me happy is there is this wonderful little coffee shop, pizza place, used bookstore on the north side of Tejon called Poor Richard's. So if any of our listeners live in Colorado Springs or are going to visit Colorado Springs, please go visit this establishment. It is awesome. And not only is it a great establishment, but I have very fond memories there because, one, I met my wife there. We did our first date there for coffee. That coffee date ended up being 3 hours long, and we ended up closing down the place. And two, it is also the place where I proposed. to my wife. And so whenever I go there, I walk by our table that we sat at when we had our first date. And I walk by the little corner in the back of the bookshop where I proposed to her. And I just can't help but smile and relive those wonderful memories.
Something about those 3-hour interviews are just beneficial, right?
I guess I passed.
Congratulations. I don't really have like a deep one. I feel like you guys all have pretty like good life-changing what's making you happy. Mine is I love Christmas and the holidays. I do. I'm one of those people that I decorate my whole house. I have multiple Christmas trees up. It's just it's getting there. So what's making me happy is I took down my Halloween decorations this weekend. I put up I have like my transition week where I have like some fall decorations that are out because I just can't bring myself to be the person that puts up a tree before Thanksgiving. But what's making me happy is I did go online and start like looking at buying some holiday decorations, planning out the holidays with my family, thinking about what, what are we going to do? And the holidays are just a time of year that brings me a lot of joy. So that's making me happy, just kind of knowing that we're getting there. And so I have beach Christmas theme. I'll show at some point, I guess when we do the holidays, I'll be in front of one of my trees or something and you can see maybe I'll do a different room so you can see the multiple trees, but yeah, it's making me happy just getting excited for the holidays.
Nice.
So I guess that's it. We survived, guys. We'll see. Yeah. Let's see what the next 4 years have in store for us. So, but thank you guys for listening. Again, if anyone's listening and you haven't already done so, please like and subscribe so we can keep doing this. And, leave a comment or two. We're a baby podcast. So anything you say, we will hear and definitely take into account as far as what we're going to do moving forward. But thanks.
All right. Next time, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.